Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give people just a minute or two to get settled in and just make sure there's no one else to bring into the Zoom. So thank you for your patience and hope everyone's having a good day. Okay, we will get started and then I'm sure there'll be others to join us. So welcome everyone. I hope everyone's been enjoying the warmer weather. We were just out on the island today and there's very little snow left. So that was kind of a surprise to see. So spring is around the corner, thank goodness. And we, again, thank you for joining us this evening. I just want to let you know that if you choose speaker view, you will be able to see both of our guests this evening, just them solely rather than the whole gallery view, but you do have to choose speaker view. So I hope that is helpful to some people. So this is our fourth session talking about Helen McDonald's Vesper flights. Although this will be our last one with Vesper flights, we will be continuing the series in March, and we will give you more details about that towards the end as well. So I want to take this time just to introduce, many of you will be familiar with Elizabeth Howard, our writer in residence in Randall's Island, and she will be in conversation this evening with Arisa White, who joins us from Maine, we welcome her and thank her for taking the time to join us on this evening. So just a little bit about Arisa. Arisa White is a Cave Common Fellow and an assistant professor of creative writing at Colby College. She is the author of 4 books, including the poetry collection, You're the Most Beautiful Thing That Happened, and co-author of the Biddy Mason Speaks Up. She's the winner of the Maine Literary Book Award for Young People's Literature and the Nautilus Book Award Gold Medal for middle grade nonfiction. She serves on the board of directors for Fog Lifter and Nomadic Press. And she has a new poetic memoir coming out entitled Who's Your Daddy, which allows psychological insights into absence, loss, love, identity, and healing as a kind of love repair. So we welcome her again this evening and thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. As you know, this is our final conversation around Helen McDonald's Vesper flights. And for those of you who've been reading the essays and have not read H is for Hawk, her previous book, I highly recommend it. It's a book that I treasure, a book that I often pull down from my bookshelf to look at it. Very special book. And I also wanted to thank Jennifer Wainwright, who's here with us this evening, who is the manager of communications and has done so much to make sure that this is posted and on social media channels and up on our website. So thank you, Jennifer. Arisa, and it's so nice to have you here. And we're actually kind of launching your book, Who's My Daddy, which I have my copy here. It has a beautiful illustration on the cover. Mine, of course, is filled with notes and I've read it a couple of times. So it's been published by Augrey Books and will be available next week. So anyway, it's very exciting. And as Nikki mentioned, you teach creative writing at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. And I know you are from Brooklyn and you've lived in California, and Maine, having grown up in New Hampshire myself, I can say Maine is different. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what it's like shifting from palm trees in California and an urban life in New York City to living in Maine.
It has definitely been a shift, and thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much, Nikki, for the introduction. And I'm also just looking forward to our conversation, Elizabeth. So moving to Maine, one of the things that I am appreciating is the 4 seasons, like being out in the San Francisco Bay Area. Beautiful sunshine all of the time, but there's this way in which time holds still because it doesn't feel like it's changing. Like the weather is just sort of similar most of the time. And I think as a result, I experienced time much differently while I was there. In a way, kind of being away from, say, my home city, my home state, I was able to reflect more deeply on my upbringing and, which memories of Brooklyn still linger on, even, while Fort Greene has changed immensely. And I think the other thing too is that I felt a different kind of introspection. And so then moving to Maine, it's a whole other sense of time and pacing, the years divided into seasons again for me. So in some ways it feels like I'm returning to another kind of geological layer of my timeline, but much older. And so here it's slower, it's quieter. There's a certain kind of silence that I haven't experienced with the snow in a rural space. The leaves falling. So there's just my attention is turned more distinctly to changes, to the wind, and things like that. So, I mean, Maine is forcing me to be a driver. And as a city girl, I resent that a little bit. But if I want to get to point B from point A or wherever, I do need to drive. But one of the beautiful things is that there's a lot of straight roads. So I have perfected the like driving straight. So, and then being able to just look at the landscape. But it's really the pacing that I'm enjoying after being in the city for about 12 years. It's nice to slow down and not have to rush anymore. And in that same kind of way, I don't feel like you got to go, you got to show up. You got to hustle. So I get to kind of find my own way of moving and being here.
Helen McDonald writes about going into those houses where you hide so that you can watch, for birds or wildlife or something and not be seen. And that, the solitude of being there and it's not just thinking of, or she enjoyed going there when she didn't see something necessarily. You don't have to, it's that solitude and silence, I think, that really is very important, contemplative for a writer, or, someone who has a lot that, that they want to think about. I know I've read this. We don't, almost at the beginning of all of our talks, in our conversations, but I think it helps kind of set for anyone who doesn't know Helen McDonald's work. In the introduction to Vesper Flight, she writes, "Someone told me that every writer has a subject that underlies everything they write. Can be love or death, betrayal or belonging, home or hope or exile. I choose to think that my subject is love, and most specifically love for the glittering world of non-human life around us." And in H is for Hawk, she writes, "There is a time in life when you expect the world to be full of new things. And then comes a day when you realize it is not how it will be at all. You see life will become a thing made of holes, absences, losses, things that were there and are there no longer." And when I was reading your book, there's one line where you just have the line, "Who's your daddy?" which of course is the title, and then a portrait of absence and presence, a story, a tale told in patchwork fashion. So I thought, and I just thought that just melded so well with what Helen was writing. So I thought you could tell us about your book.
So, I mean, I do, I love that that moment in the introduction in Vesper Flights, and I underlined it a whole bunch because I was like, yes, yes. Because there was a point when writing where I was often kind of concerned about, like, you know, I could sort of like plunge myself into sort of these hard questions about family dynamics and relationships. Like, why do we do the things we do? Why do we stay in abusive relationships? Why this, right? Sort of that sense of having expectations not met, and that feel like a deep betrayal of the story of your life, of how it's supposed to be constructed. And so in some ways I often felt self-conscious about sort of putting myself out there, um, allowing myself to use the personal as the space in which I'm going to interrogate a lot of larger questions about who we are and why we do the things that we do. And a writer friend of mine, Matthew Goodman, said to me, he's like, Arisa, your work is about love. And I love that he said that to me, because it's so very true. And it's very much coming from this heart center. It's coming from a desire to heal, to attempt to make things whole, or at least to begin the stitching process. And there's something about moving into the difficult, sort of like shielded and coated with love, that allows me to dive deeply and sort of do that messy work, because I believe that what I'm doing is in the service of more than just myself. And so Who's Your Daddy is a similar kind of process for me. I was, my mother on my 33rd birthday, my Jesus year, asked me if I wanted to write my father in Guyana. And by that time, the last memory I had of him was, sometime when I was 3 years old. And I just remember running away from him because he was a stranger to me. And so I had to so I had that old memory, and then this new sort of like request to go and search him out. And I had to sort of just pause and ask myself, like, what is it that I want? What is it that I want to know? And so as I began to sort of think about what it is that I am seeking, I just started writing poems and writing epistolary poems addressed to my father. And so, I mean, that process began to extend outward. I was able to get a grant that allowed me to then self-publish those epistolary poems in a chapbook form. And my idea was to kind of, make like a limited edition run of 100 copies. And then I also was I held community-based workshops in the San Francisco Bay Area around epistolary writing, and particularly holding space for participants to write about their estranged fathers, absent fathers, and patriarchal figures as well. And so those workshops were so rich with conversation, and I started to recognize that the story of this sort of narrative of the absent father, the distant father, was very much a part of many people's lives. And so I began to realize this story is not my own. This issue is not my own. And because of that, I didn't feel like I was writing from this singular voice. I started to construct a narrative voice that felt more communal. It wasn't an I that was navel gazing. It was an I that was sort of centered in community and sort of shifting my gaze to sort of allow other voices to enter this question of who's your daddy. And so the other part of that grant allowed me to, so the other component was that in those workshops, participants can exchange their letters for the epistolary collection of chapbooks. So I wind up collecting these letters. I also did a call for submissions, and I got letters from inmates in San Quentin. I got a letter as far as the Philippines, and it was just sort of exciting and interesting and sad to read our similar narratives of kind of abandonment. And then what was also particularly heartwarming and heart opening was that I had like 2 rounds of exchanging letters with one of the guys who was in San Quentin. And he just, was just reflecting on how he was continuing the cycle of absence. His father wasn't there. His father's father wasn't there. And now he was imprisoned and his children were out in the world sort of growing up without him. And so I got to sort of feel from the father side what that felt like through this letter exchange, and begin to develop a sense of empathy. I could sort of allow my anger to just sort of like dissolve a little bit, and that anger sort of allowed me just to reach outward more and ask more questions, and then even encouraged me to be like, I can do this. I can go to Guyana and see my father. And so that was the last component of the grant, was going to Guyana, meeting my father, giving him that collection of poems, and just being in his home country. So it was just this whole process that I think I didn't want to do it alone. And it was really interesting how I opened it up to allow the community to participate in helping me write this narrative of like, who's your daddy, as well as reading cultural studies, articles, sociology stuff, so it was intertextual and it was very communal, this collection.
So I always like writers to read their beautiful work, poetic words, which yours certainly are. Can you read that on page? It's on page 117. The trip to, who is it? I'm sure I would mispronounce it. Kaitou Falls.
Yes, I still mispronounce it. It's like,
okay,
yeah,
good.
Kaitou Falls. Yes.
But I would love to have you read that because it's so beautiful.
Oh, yes. So also within this, as I read this passage, I also kind of tell the legend of the chieftain Kai, who sacrificed himself for his tribe. So essentially to create peace within the community. And so something about that legend just really resonated so poignantly with meeting my father. And then also, one of the things he said to me and meeting him was that it was good that I wasn't around. I wasn't a good guy. So in some ways I began to sort of read that as, or feel that as, his self-sacrifice for the betterment of my life, which was, kind of, it's like a double sword in a way, because in some ways it's like, you took away the opportunity of a relationship that could have actually repaired your bad behavior in a way. So it's our last full day in Guyana, and we wake at 5 a.m. to go to Kaitou Falls. Kaitou is the longest single drop waterfall in the world, with a total distance from top to bottom of 822 feet. We fly in a 9-passenger airplane that was built in the 1970s. There are ashtrays for us to deposit our butts, and at one point, the aircraft hits turbulence and drops half a mile in altitude. I grab Monday Way's hand in preparation for our death. The world we fly over is rainforest occupied, rivers, and then it opens up into a gorge and mist abounds. We land and the air is so fresh, it's like drinking water. We take a moderate hike to the top of the falls, and while on the trail, our guide tells us to stop, turn to our right, and about 8 feet away is a cock of the rock, a rare bright orange bird with a crescent-shaped hairstyle. Our guide tells us we are lucky because people come here from all over the world to see it and go home disappointed. I'm in awe. Before I knew the legend, there was the impulse to let the water take me down, to fall with it, to give into its seductive, forceful tresses. This is what the Patamona Amerindian chief named Kai did, sacrificed himself to the great spirit Makonaima to save the tribe from the Caribs. He took his canoe and paddled over the point where the Potara River plunges into the gorge below. Tir means falls in the local dialect. It's believed Kai remains living in a cave behind the drop, and when mist surrounds the falls, Kai is cooking, possibly a meal, I wonder, to welcome his daughter home. I get myself as close to the cliff's edge as I can muster, to see the depth, to feel the pool of earth opening up. I run my hands in river water, pick up stones of that hard red black rock we stand on, lay prone on it, press my breast, belly, hips, thighs, turn my head to the side and listen. The rock is warm and it vibrates. Its touch resounds, shifts my molecules to resemble its molecules, and I'm unlocked and revived by a wild, sacrificial, grand love.
So beautiful. And you know, one of the essays in the Vesper Flights book that we haven't really talked about is Elegy. And Helen McDonald is writing about a very dear friend who's in hospice and dying. And I just, as you were reading this, I was just looking at that paragraph where she says, for years on and off, I've woken in the dark, shouting out loud, stricken with horror at the impossible fact of death, but it was my most abiding and paralyzing terror. But it was Stu who had banished it from me. You know, that idea, you know, of being that it's okay, that, you know, it's love and death. And I think that one of the things that I find so much in Helen McDonald's writing is the fact that she's showing us through nature, through the cycles of the season, that, you know, the renewal of spring and winter, that she helps us understand time and movement and transformation.
Definitely. She does. And I think, I mean, what was also interesting about, I'm intrigued too by her opening lines, because in that she starts off by saying something about, I have to turn to the page. By 9, the sun has set behind the king's forest. And it just sets up the whole tone of that whole section in a wonderful way. And that so preparing us for the darkness, preparing us for the idea that the light is going to go out behind the king, the governance, the authority. And in that section, I thought so much about this idea of that confronting our mortality and sort of walking into that sort of nothingness is actually, it's not hard, you know. It's like, I often tell my students and want to often talk about, you know, some of the trauma that they've dealt with. And there's a way in which I want to sort of set them up to do that hard work, but at the same time, I want them to develop the structure to be able to go into that kind of darkness. And that's one of the things that I love about that section, or just like Helen using nature and animal life and plant life. It offers a structure for how to enter into and how to come out of and how to return again, because you can't go into those dark spaces without the container, without some kind of knowledge or the lessons passed down to you. And so when my students are wanting to work on those difficult narratives, one of the first things I ask them is, where's the support? How are you going to begin this? Who's going to be there to enable you along the way? Like, it's not just me, but who else is there? What else is there? You know, how do you create your environment, your ecosystem to sort of bring forth the narrative that you most need to tell?
You know, I mean, we've, in the conversations we've had, Arisa, we've talked about, you know, what she brings to those of us who are writers, you know, and her use of language. And do you want to read, we were talking about that paragraph in Turkle's Park. Would you like to read? I'd love to have you read that. It's on page 29.
Okay.
Every year the meadow grew back and thrived. Or wait.
Yeah, it's that middle paragraph.
It's
right?
that, it's the 9-acre meadow. Where is that? Wait a minute.
Okay.
Just exactly where that is. I have it here. I thought I had marked it. It is, well, you can read on page actually 31. We think so
Okay.
often the path to something like a nature. That's
Okay.
yeah. That's
So, okay, it's like the closing paragraph. All right.
yes.
We so often think of the past as something like a nature reserve, a discrete, bounded place we can visit in our imaginations to make us feel better. I wonder how we could learn to recognize that the past is always working on us and through us, and that diversity in all its forms, human and natural, is strength. That messy stretches of species-rich vegetation with all their attendant invertebrate life are better, just better, than the airy, impoverished silence of modern planting schemes and fields. I wonder how we might learn to align our aesthetic and our moral landscapes to fit that intuition. I wonder, I think of the meadow. Those clouds of butterflies have met with local extinction, but held in that soil is a bank of seeds that will hang on. They will hang on for a very long time. And when I drive past the fence these days, staring out at 50 miles per hour, I know that what I'm looking for beyond the fence is a place that draws me because it exists neither wholly in the past nor in the present, but is caught in a space in between. And that space is a place which gestures towards the future and whose little hurts are hope. I love that section.
Yeah, and there's another one that, as I say, I thought that I had marked that, where she talks about so much of what we have there must have arrived in hay brought for long dead horses as seeds from lowland meadows, scabious, knapweed, trefoil, harbel, lady's bed straw, quaking grass, vetches, diverse other grasses and herbage, and butterflies too marooned in their small patch of 19th century common blues, small skippers, grizzled skippers, marbled whites, small coppers, and grasshoppers that sang all summer. I mean, you know, do you think, Arisa, that she makes lists? I mean, how do you?
She totally makes lists. I just believe she has to make lists. I mean, it's just so beautiful the way, I mean, it's also her training as a naturalist and her attention to the natural world and its patterns and the words that go along with it. It's just, there's the excitement she has for the natural world gets so wonderfully translated into her text. And I just, that, as you were reading that, I could feel how life was populating that space. I can also hear it, like I can, with the assonance and the consonants and the alliteration, there's so much music and rhythm and in those words sort of brought into like the sonics of the season almost. Yeah, it's just so beautiful. As I was reading through the book, I was just circling words and new phrases or old words that just came alive in a different way because of it was in combination with something scientific. So yeah, I just love when I can read stuff like this and have the dictionary app next to me and I'm looking at words and the etymology and just sort of getting lost in the history of the word itself. And that's just beautiful. Even in thinking about the first paragraph, well, which is the culminating paragraph of this essay that I read, we so often think of the past as something like a nature reserve, but just this, that knowing that the past is always with us, and even our words are layers of that as well. You know, like I often tell my students, I'm like, look up words, but really look up the etymology, because they're, this idea that a word has a root is really fascinating to me. And then often in that root, it's an image that you can play with or amplify in a way that our common usage has ignored, you know?
Mhm. Have you, so I have Robert McFarlane's book that he did, and it had one title in Britain and another here. And so where he went around the UK to all these small sort of rural environments and looked at a lot of the language around, you know, farming and nature, because a lot of these words are being removed from our vocabulary, from the dictionaries, and they're being replaced with things like Zoom and, you know, all the,
it's like our world is changing. So yeah.
And I think, but I'm also seeing that I think we're seeing much more nature in fiction and in writing. I mean, I think it's becoming much more poetic. Are you seeing? I mean, things like, you know, like your work and Helen's work. I mean, it isn't as defined, you know, a strict narrative that you know, is quite as much based in just exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I am seeing that. And I think it's, you know, as you know, I was just thinking about the question of like how, you know, how has nature influenced my writing? And it reminds me so much of was it David Foster Wallace or David Wallace Foster? I can't. Well, he did this commencement speech, and I don't remember where and what year. Can't even remember the order of his name. But basically, he talks about how, you know, a fish, like the fish are going around and someone says like, what's water?
Right.
And so that's kind of almost the way in which I have a relationship with nature. It's like, what's nature? You know, it's just so a part of how I experience the world wherever I am and where, you know, wherever I'm writing, that it comes in. It's just a part of how I'm making sense of myself in relationship to so many other things. And then also thinking too about how writers are often on retreats. If you can, you know, manage to get yourself a retreat or a residency, and it's often in this, you know, pastoral, bucolic, off on an island, some cute little woodsy kind of place. And or there's this sense of isolation in a place by yourself, which is kind of like a, you know, another new environment you need to negotiate. And I realized that often when I am writing, my revision process is taking place in a natural environment. I, you know, and think in sort of starting Who's Your Daddy, I was at Headlands in Marin County in California, and just found myself on the marshes and the beach and then learning about the different trees that were brought into this landscape that aren't, you know, sort of natural to this environment, and the issues that it's causing. And just, you know, and just sort of thinking about the sense that even our natural places have been man-made and created for us. And then you have to learn that history as well. Because this forest wasn't always there. So what was there before? And what does it mean to have a forest in a place where it didn't arise naturally? So it's just like these really kind of fascinating questions I get to feel through, especially during the revision process, as I'm like looking at trees and paying attention to the waves or the seagull that keeps on showing up by my window every day. and noticing that it is the same seagull. Like, it's so, and then it's just, it has a way of breaking my eye, you know, optically, narratively, and it just forces me to pay attention to other possibilities and other routes that I can take, as, you know, in my own work, in my own self-development as well.
Yeah, well, you know, I started walking on Randall's Island during the pandemic last March, you know, March and April. And I found it because I must, you know, when you come back to New York sometime after the pandemic, you must come to Randall's Island and walk. And, you know, there are woods, and there's a stumpery, and there's natural flowers, and you're right down by the water with the rocks. I mean, you know, and there's so, I mean, I think being next to water and rivers, and, you know, feeling the current moving, and and I just found it so contemplative. And also, unlike Central Park, which is wonderful, which seems more like a planned area. You know, there's so much on Randall's Island that you really feel like you're there with nature, and you're looking, you know, you're looking back at the city. You're not, you know, and so even though you're in the city, you've walked over this walkway, and you're removed a little bit, and you know, you have a sense of. And you talked to me about walking in California around a lake. I mean, I think it's something about water, isn't it, too?
Yeah, definitely. I lived about, you know, a block away from Lake Merritt, which is a man-made lake or estuary kind of, in the middle of the city. And I was just so surprised by that. In my imagination, a city doesn't have a lake in the middle of it. So, and then the fact that I could then afford to live across from it was even astounding to me. Like, so, and also, I mean, during that time, I was like going through my Saturn return. I was like, oh, what am I doing with my life? Why am I here? Why did I disrupt my, like, why did I disrupt my living in the East Coast to come out? I was just like, I couldn't understand what I did. And so I just walked that lake, and it was almost like each time I, you know, completed a revolution around it, I got to a place of clarity about those essential questions of like, who am I? Where am I bound? What am I doing? Why am I here? And it's not that it was a direct answer, but something just settled. It's like I learned to accept. I learned to just sort of be. And I also learned how to be with my emotion. And I think when you're walking, you get to really move, and then experience the movement that is our emotions. And so just thinking about how my own pace, my feet hitting the ground just becomes a sort of metronome, or it's a way of dissolving that tight feeling of anger in the chest, or a sense of confusion that just feels like crackles in the head that can just get washed away. And it can fully absorb into your body in a way where you don't need to be pulled in a sort of like here or there, or choose or divide yourself. So yeah, so the lake, I mean, and the lake has been such a saving grace for me in so many ways. And it's gonna turn up in a work that I'm working on now, because it made me one of the things I realized when writing Who's Your Daddy and going to Guyana, was that nature allowed me to kind of connect to spirit. It allowed me to not have to justify my intelligence. I can learn my own sense of knowing and how I make meaning for myself. I could talk into those deep, dark spaces and hear my own voice come back to me with its own answers and its own answers. And the answer would often be just the sound of me breathing, being alive, and living each day. And so, walking around Lake Merritt became a prayer, a whole body prayer. And because, I started to realize that, the educational systems I've gone through, the institutions that are supposed to support me, um, the family structures that are supposed to undergird me, those things aren't going to always be there. So what else is there? What is that? What is our deeper connection to things? And I get to develop a language of that, in nature, with nature, and being with people in nature as well. So yeah, I think it's this kind of spiritual becoming, every time I'm allowed to just be with myself in relationship to, say, a body of water.
In Swan Upping, another essay in Helen's book, and she talks about it's the ceremony that they have in Britain where they really do sort of a census of the swans on the Thames, and because the swans belong to the Queen, and it's
Yeah.
but she even takes something like that and looks at, so she's really looking at ritual,
Mhm.
national identity, personal identity. I mean, that whole, I think that's one of the things that we're going to go through. I think going through this pandemic is, this idea of being alone, being separated even more
Mhm.
than we were. We've been segregated from everything, and how are we going to come back? How are we going to come back together, kind of trusting
Mhm.
everything, and then questioning in some ways our culture and our identity. I mean, it's going to, and I think, I've had this on my desk today, Ferlin Getty's little book called Poetry as an Insurgent Art,
Nice.
as art. And I thought,
Mhm.
I loved Ferlinghetti's poems. So of course I was very sad at his death, but he was 100 years old. But, and I'm just thinking of everything that happened in Washington. And I thought, an insurgent art. I mean, I think there seems to be now much more attention paid to poetry and,
Mhm.
and this, the kind of writing that you're doing too.
Yeah. And I think it's because it allows us, because one of the things Helen talked about in that essay is that she mentions a painter and how this
Right.
painter went to, was it Japan or China? And sort of talked about, because there are traditions, those traditions create a universality. And one of the things, for, especially, being, identifying as a Black queer writer, there's often this, cloud hanging over my head where, like, to write about my life isn't universal. And so there's this, the particulars of my life are not universal, and constantly, having to deal with that, especially if you think about the canon, especially just these arguments around it all. But what, but it's actually paying attention to your day-to-day that is so, I think about Audre Lorde saying the personal is political, and the fact that, and for me, turning my attention to the personal is about collective transformation. I deeply believe that we can't do big changes if at this individual level, you're still operating on flawed, like you're working, you're in this wounded place, you are operating from narratives that no longer serve you or anybody else around you. So how do we pay attention to ourselves so that we can break some of those knots down, muscular knots, as well as the negation of ourselves through the language of not and can't and won't, or, you can't do this, or you can't that, like whatever. And I think in many ways, and, there's something where we have to begin to understand through our social locations and the ways in which we identify, that they give us insight into how the larger system is working. But also at the same time, we have to find ways not to be bound to those identities, because it establishes another narrative in which we can get stuck, in which we still work out the same messes in which we are calling out right now. So it has to, I feel like we always have to look inward and outward and constantly doing that work, where I believe if you're going to call someone out on what they do, you then have to call yourself out on that same exact thing. I believe that we have to be able to find our national wounds within our personal selves and begin to figure out the methods, the strategies, the tears, the time that is needed to work through all of those things. So I think traditions can be a way to start, but I'm always wary of them, because I need them to be flexible. They need to be fluid. They need to change with us. But one of the things that I value about tradition is that it requires community to be involved. It requires an intergenerational conversation. So when I think tradition, I'm instantly thinking of my grandmother. I have to bring her into the conversation. I have to bring, my nieces and my grandnieces into the conversation as well. And then we create our models, our traditions, our strategies for moving forward. And I think that's how it has to work. Inner and outer work.
Do you find that your students who are younger perhaps are going to help reshape our world? I mean, that they have a different outlook, let's say, than.
Yeah, I do. I think we're all shaping our world right now, all of us, and sometimes I think, the younger generation has that energy and fire. But if we kind of think of it, if we think of ourselves as elements, we also need our earth in that. And for me, the earth are the older people, the ones who have anchored, who have spent time, have moved through time, and time has moved through them. So we just sort of need like an ecosystem of people who have occupied the different timelines of our now to participate and change. So that it's not just like the future generation. It sometimes feels like a cop-out. No, you do the work now, so that whatever you establish here, the younger people can, revise, move forward, do as they need to do in accordance to what's going on in the world at the time.
I've read this week Alexander Mather's essay. He was the 7th grader who named Perseverance, the Mars rover, and his winning essay is so sweet about how, we will persevere. I mean, that's why it was selected. It was selected out of 28,000 applications. And so I thought, Amanda Gorman, and, I just had these wonderful, these young voices that are, well, we're beginning to end our program. I wondered, Arisa, if you'd like to read something else. Is there something else that you'd like to read from your book?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll read this short piece on 53 about walking the lake.
Oh, no, very nice.
I walk with a poet friend around Lake Merritt, all its miles, starting from the east and then returning east. The hour holds us in amber. I say to my friend, I'm ready to be a woman who's matured her femininity, who appreciates all that has gotten me through, that has gotten me here. A grown ass woman, not subdued by shame, I set forth. Several double-crested cormorants surface from a deep dive in the lake's brackish waters. Their wings spread to dry, and geese fly in arrowhead formation.
It's just so beautiful. Well, we have time if anyone would like to put a question in the chat for Arisa. I'm sure that. And can you tell us, Arisa, about the book you're working on? What are you?
Oh, it's well, the title, the working title is She, a Sister Outsider's Heroine's Journey. And it's set in Lake Merritt. And so basically the main character is, she's kind of making her revolution around the lake. And there are 9 stages that she has to go through. And as I'm imagining it, and because, one of the reasons why I said it at Lake Merritt is because Oakland is known for its Black lesbian presence. So one of the things that I want to invoke in this 9-stage heroine's journey is the kind of the activism, the mutual aid that sort of Black lesbians created in Oakland. So I want to revive that past in the text, as well as the political history of Oakland with the Black Panthers as well. But mostly I'm trying to animate the divine feminine in this work. And so it's been really interesting also reading about Olani legends and traditions and animacy, and really trying to think about how to make a place a character without making the place a caricature of humanity.
Wow, so when do you think, how far along are you in that book?
Well, I have like scraps of ideas. I have more notebooks than I have like coherent writing. But I'm going on sabbatical this time next year. So I just plan to travel to a few archives, the Audre Lorde archives in Spelman, because The Sister Outsider is based on the title of Audre Lorde's collected essays, Sister Outsider. But then I'm also playing with the idea of, being outside in nature and eco-psychology as well. So I want to visit her archives and just kind of see her handwriting and go through notes. And then also, I want to, one of the things that I'm pretty fascinated by, sort of conceptually, philosophically, is silence. Audre Lorde talks about the transformation of silence into language and action. And so for me, I'm thinking, what are the qualities of silence? Silence, nothingness, absence, quiet. And I want to visit places that are known to be silent or quiet places and kind of begin to apprehend the qualities of that in nature and what shows up for me creatively when I'm in those spaces.
Sounds really wonderful. So I think the next book that we're going to read is World of Wonders. Have you read World of Wonders?
I got it the other day, so it's on my shelf of many books to read right now.
I know. So it's also a book of essays.
Yeah.
Around it's here. It's.
I know, and there's drawings as well.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, in praise of fireflies, whale sharks, and other astonishments. It's a really beautiful book. And it's published by Milkweed Press out in Minneapolis, and they just have an incredible. I just got some of their books. They do amazing publishing, and it's actually out of print. I mean, it right now it's being.
Oh, wow.
They're in the middle of reprinting it.
That's so great.
By the 1st of March, they will have more copies. It's a little bit difficult right now, but it was Barnes and Noble Book of the Year, and it's just absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to reading it myself. I just got it, and we're going to have programs on March 25th, Thursday, April 8th, April 22nd, and May 6th. So, and we'll have other people joining us. I'm hoping maybe the author will. We're just waiting to see if we can schedule her in. So,
that would be great.
Anyway, so Arisa, I can't thank you enough. This was just
thank you so much.
And I think Helen McDonald would really have enjoyed this conversation.
I agree.
And I keep hoping that perhaps if she ever comes to New York in the spring when her book comes out in paperback, that maybe we could meet her. So we'd love to invite you to join us. If
I would love to. That would be great.
I was just going to extend the same. Arisa, thank you, and Elizabeth too. Thank you very much for this evening. It was wonderful, and I look forward to picking up more of your work and look forward to the next book, Arisa. But definitely, when you're back in New York, we would love to have you on the island. So please definitely let us know. And
I definitely want to go. I mean, it's in some ways the barrows can be like so separated, and it's like you do when you're in Brooklyn, you do Brooklyn things.
Yes. Well, we can claim that we're so close to all of them but Brooklyn, and so yes. But please let us know, and we would love to have you be able to see all the different corners of the island. That would be wonderful. Thank you both very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. As Elizabeth mentioned, we set for March 25th, and we'll have more information on our website. If you ever have questions, you can reach out to me directly. Absolutely. And we'll leave it there for now. So thank you all. Be well, be safe, and we will see you next month.
And thank you, Nikki, for all you're doing.
Thank you again, Reese. It was lovely meeting you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.